Welcome to Beyond the Grave, where darkness and the unknown collide. Join us on a spine-tingling journey through the chilling realms of the supernatural. Prepare to be haunted by eerie tales, ghostly encounters, and the unexplained mysteries that lurk in the shadows. Subscribe now, if you dare, and let's unravel the secrets that lie beyond the grave together. Hope you would enjoy the 1-hour scary story compilation on our channel. Subscribe our channel, and press the bell icon for more disturbing and chilling scary stories. I usually like to watch TV with my little sister Kimberly. She was only 5, so of course she watched all the cute kid shows. I didn't really mind though. They made her happy, and I liked spending time with her. She watched shows like Dora, Blue's Clues, and Arthur. We often had a lot of DVDs of old kids shows around the house that we would watch. There was a large box of old movies and TV shows in the attic. I took a brief look at it once, but none of them looked like they would appeal to her. One day, Kimberly was at a doctor's appointment, and I thought I'd have time to watch a movie aimed more at my age range. So I thought this would be a good time to look through the box of old movies in the attic. While I looked through the box, I noticed that these movies didn't really interest me, but I kept looking in hopes of finding something. Then I saw, at the bottom of the box, a DVD labeled Colwyn's Corner. Many memories started to come back to me. I used to watch this show as a kid. It was about an orange puppet named Colwyn who lived in a house on the corner of a street. He would often have his other puppet friends come over to play games and sing songs. It was cute and innocent, and I remember really liking it as a kid. I thought this would be a good show for my sister and me to watch. When Kimberly got home, I told her I had a new show for us to watch. She got excited and sat down on the couch while I put the disc in. I sat down next to her as the selection screen popped up. The screen looked just as I remembered it. It showed Colwyn and his friends in front of the house. I chose the first episode, and the theme song began. I was a little confused. The colors were a lot darker than I remember, and the song was sung a lot slower and in a deeper voice. I didn't think much of it, as I hadn't seen the show in a long time, and probably forgot some elements of it. The show began pretty normally. Colwyn was in his house and said hello to the viewers. There was a knock on his door, and he said, "I think my friends are here." When he opened the door, I felt my heart in my throat. Standing at the door were 2 tall white puppets with no nose or mouth, only pitch black eyes. I was shocked because I don't even remember these characters on the show. Even the cover of the DVD showed 2 colorful, friendly puppets. I looked over at Kimberly, and she had this big smile on her face. I was confused since an image like that would terrify a child. "I'm not sure if we should watch this anymore," I told her. "No, please. Keep it on," she exclaimed. I continued watching as the giant puppets didn't seem to faze her. The 2 large puppets came into the house. Colwyn asked, "What do you guys want to do today?" The one puppet replied with the most horrific sound I've ever heard. It sounded like a man was shouting, almost screaming, in a strange language. The audio was very distorted. At this point, I got up and ejected the disc from the VCR, much to Kimberly's disappointment. "Why did you stop it? Put it back on," she said. I didn't listen and put the DVD in a drawer. Even though Kimberly wasn't bothered by the show, I still thought it was too disturbing for a 5-year-old. I had trouble sleeping that night. I kept thinking about the video. I watched that show all the time when I was younger, and I definitely have seen every episode. I didn't understand why I didn't remember an episode like this. I was still curious about the rest of the episode. I decided to go downstairs to finish it. I took the DVD out of the drawer and put it in the VCR. I put on headphones so the noise wouldn't disturb my family. The episode began the same way, with the strange intro and the large puppets. After the one puppet made the terrifying sound, Colwyn replied, "You're right, we should play a game." He then grabbed a knife from the counter. It cut to a live-action arm painted orange to represent Colwyn's. The knife went up to the arm and started to cut slits, each one deeper than the last. Colwyn started to scream a blood-curdling scream. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I felt sick to my stomach. Blood gushed out of the wounds as the screams got louder and louder. It then cut to a live-action neck painted orange. The knife went up to the throat and cut a deep slit in it, and blood began gushing out. It showed Colwyn gasping heavily for air before his eyes turned completely white. The episode ended with him falling to the ground as the two tall, white puppets looked directly into the camera with pitch-black eyes. I was utterly terrified at this point. I immediately ejected the DVD and threw it in the trash. I couldn't sleep at all that night. I kept thinking about the episode. I got up the next morning and went downstairs to get some breakfast. I walked past Kimberly's room and saw that she wasn't in there. When I got downstairs, I saw her on the couch, finishing up the horrific episode I watched last night. I immediately grabbed the remote and turned the TV off. "Why did you do that?" she asked. "Where did you get the DVD?" I shouted. "It was in the garbage," she replied. "I took it out because I wanted to finish the episode. This show is very bad." I shouted. "No, it's not," she said. "They were just baking the cake." "What?" I said. "The episode was about Colwyn and his friends baking the cake," she replied. "Advertisements," I was shocked. "What did his friends look like?" I asked. "One was blue and one was red," she replied. "I really liked it. Can I watch it again?" So my grandpa recently died, not unexpectedly, might I add. At 81, he had a good run. Anyway, my mom and I had to go to his house and grab anything we wanted to keep before the cleaning crew came in to clear it out. During the process of searching through his bedroom, I came across his box of military stuff, most of which belonged to his father, my great-grandfather, who had died in the Second World War. I had fond memories of this box. My granddad would tell me stories about the photos and letters inside. How much of the stories were true, I can't say because he wasn't in the war, but nevertheless, it kept me entertained as a young kid. As I began to look through the box, the memories came flooding back, every letter and trinket reminding me of his story, until I came to one letter. Postmarked October 1944, it appeared to be another letter from my great-grandfather to a man named David, who I believe may have been his brother, but unlike the other letters describing the war and conditions, this was different. As I read it, I realized my granddad had never shown me this letter. I'm still unsure what to make of it. The letter is as follows. Dear David, it's been almost 3 weeks since my two friends Howard and Johnson went missing, and I can't keep this to myself any longer. Someone needs to know the details in case something happens to me. Normally I would just blame the Croats, as they are the cause of most of my missing soldiers. But this is different. It started around a month ago, when my men started reporting finding these black leather-bound diaries while out on patrol. Of course, as we are occupying a town, it's not uncommon to find things like these around. However, these diaries were odd. The diaries contained the names of my soldiers scrawled on the inside cover, no other writing, just the name. And then, after a certain date, the pages seemed to have been ripped out. Putting it down to the enemy playing mind games, I ignored the reports, thinking that maybe they were just writing common names in them to unnerve us. I remember hearing from HQ that they had used mind games before, like hiding soldiers' helmets and pieces of glass to reflect light in windows and woods to look like snipers. However, what set these diaries apart was that over the next few days, they started to appear around the city. Now, I know my lookouts are tired and sometimes half-drunk, but surely even they would notice someone getting that close. The other thing is that no matter how many of these things we collected, burned, or destroyed, they would appear again the next morning. I don't know who put them there, or with what intention, but there they were. And they were having an effect on some of my troops. Many, including my friend Captain Howard, who, after finding a diary with his name in it, claimed to hear whispers when no one was around. Howard was also plagued with dreams where he was lost in a wasteland, and a voice on his radio would recite the time and date of his death over and over until he would wake in a cold sweat. He never told me the date or time, but on the 22nd of August, he went on routine patrol and never returned. His good friend, Captain Johnson, whom he had known since childhood, was naturally distraught. The loss of his friend hit him hard. I had to abandon the search after 5 days, and he became very angry. At this point, he must have felt the only thing to do was continue the search himself, as he was seen leaving the city the same day with a rifle and standard issue kit. 3 days later, around dusk, a lookout spotted a figure walking out of the thick fog that had come down during the day. He had returned, but something was different. His eyes were vacant, he had pale skin, and he had none of the kit he left with, apart from the ripped and blood-stained fatigues. His blood remained a mystery as he had no visible injuries and wouldn't speak. He just followed me like a small child. He refused food and water. I say refused. It was as if it were foreign to him, like he'd forgotten what to do with it. Over the next 24 hours, he did strange things. He broke every mirror in the medical area. He was kept in and drew all the curtains. Preferring to sit in the dark, I insisted 2 men watch over him. A couple of days later, I awoke to one of my men banging on my door around 5 a.m. "Sir, there's been an incident," he said. I arrived at the medical area around 5:15 a.m. A crowd had gathered around the house that was our makeshift medical area, all staring at the blood still dipping from the blown-out main window. I walked inside through the recently broken door. Inside, it looked as though someone had redecorated using machine guns and body parts. There had been a fight. Bullet casings littered the floor, as did the remains of my men. He was nowhere to be found. Had he escaped the fight? Was he taken away? All I know for sure is that the day after he disappeared, so did the dairy in the fog. Then one morning, after not finding a diary on patrol for just over 2 weeks, I was presented with one found on patrol that morning. I could tell from the patrolman's expression before I even opened it. And there it was, smeared in black ink on the inside cover. I quickly flicked to the back. The last page was October 15th. Today is October 14th. Do you own to sleep facing the mirror? I had just come home from a tiring day. I had to stay in school until 8 because I had failed a math test and had to go for extra lessons. I was so freaking tired. Mom and Dad were overseas for a little vacation for a few days, so I was all alone at home. I was brushing my teeth while looking at myself in the mirror. It was a beautiful circular mirror with intricate designs on the glass. Mom bought it for $100 at an auction. It had been in our house for a few years. I remembered how, as a little kid, Mom would tell me an old Chinese superstition. "You must never sleep facing a mirror," she warned me, "or your soul will go into the mirror and live in it." A part of me dismissed her words as a chunk of nonsense, but another part of me believed her, and hence there were no mirrors in my bedroom. I proceeded to bend down and rinse my mouth. What I saw when I looked up again had me shell-shocked for the rest of my life. My face in the mirror wasn't my face in the mirror. It was the face of a girl with big, really, really big white eyes and long black hair. And her lips were redder than the reddest of lips. Blood was dripping down her chin and onto her white dress. Her white eyes had that gloomy look about them. It was almost as if she looked really sad. I wanted to reach out to touch her and tell her everything was okay, that nothing was going to go wrong. I felt like I was partially hypnotized. The lights in the bathroom went off. That snapped me out of my little trance. I jumped, taken aback. Suddenly, the girl in the mirror said in a high-pitched, girly, sinister voice, "I need to escape. Out of this mirror. Help me." I tried to take a step back, but to no avail. I tried to move the rest of my body, but couldn't. I made an attempt to scream, but nothing came out of my mouth. I could only watch the girl/half-snake move 3 inches closer towards me in the mirror. At any moment now, she would probably get out of the mirror like the long-haired girl from that horror movie got out of the television and kill me. No, that was not going to happen. Mentally teetering on the verge of panic, I struggled even harder than before. I tried to turn around and run. Still, nothing happened. The girl continued to inch closer to me in the mirror. Shit. Any moment now. But she didn't. Sasli fast sing this, mirror to e8, and you will not suffer. And she vanished. In her place was me, sweating like I had just run a 40-kilometer marathon, with eyes wide like saucers, but still me. I tried to move my arms, and it worked. It worked. I could move my legs, my head, my knees, and my entire fucking body. I had never been so relieved. But that relief was soon replaced by what the girl, or snake, or whatever, had told me just now. No, I wasn't going to sleep facing the mirror tonight. No way. I would rather go to school naked than sleep facing a mirror. I would rather eat shit than sleep facing a fucking mirror. All of that. The girl, the mirror, whatever, was probably a nightmare I had. I looked into the mirror again. Seeing my own reflection, I was fully convinced that it was all nothing and rinsed my mouth, changed into my pajamas, and went to bed. That was probably the best decision I had ever made in my entire fucking life. I woke up the next day to find out I wasn't in bed. It didn't take me long to find out that I was in a hospital. Bandages were all over my body. Some were even covering the bottom half of my face. Suddenly, the memory of the terrifying nightmare I had the previous night came flooding back into my head, and I began to wonder what happened after that. Why did I even end up in the hospital? I tried to call out for a nurse, but all that came out of my mouth was a noise that sounded like a chicken was being strangled. A nurse appeared beside me. "Oh, you've woken up," she said in a cheery voice. "I'm sorry, but part of your house was burned down last night. The firefighters rescued you just in time. Your mom and dad have booked flight tickets back here. You could have died back there, you know. The police thought that everything else in that part of your house was gone in the fire, but they were wrong. They managed to find a circular mirror that wasn't even burned in your bathroom. Just about everything else in that part of your house was either badly burned or gone." My eyes widened. The nurse chuckled. "I know, right? I guess the mirror is a magical one. Haha. Anyway, your mom and dad decided they didn't want it anymore because it seemed like the mirror had been giving them bad luck ever since they bought it. According to what I heard yesterday, they wanted to get rid of it, but were really busy, so they kept forgetting about it until the fire happened. When they found out that the mirror was the only thing in that part of your house that wasn't either badly burned or reduced to ashes, they were so shocked that they decided to sell it to a friend who was interested in mirrors." She shrugged. "You okay?" I nodded. "Good. I'm going to attend to the other patients. If you need anything, call me, okay?" She smiled and walked away. So there you go. A creepypasta with a nice ending. Just don't ever go to sleep facing a mirror, or else. The native crouched over the dying fire pit. He was making a circle with the skulls. The smell of the jungle was overpowering, and he could hear the distinct yipping of jackals in the distance. The painted tribesman muttered unintelligible words in an unknown tongue, hovering over the circle in the flickering firelight. His eyes snapped up from the fire and looked straight into Charlie's. He bore a hole through him as his muttering picked up tempo and volume. Tribal drums warmed their way into the sultry night, although no drummers were in sight. The drums and the tribesman's chants reached a fever pitch, and he made one single word: Mokambu. Charlie awoke violently, covered in sweat. It had been 2 weeks since he was in the jungles of Botswana, but the nightmares were getting more intense each time he closed his eyes. "Come on, man, snap out of it," he said, rubbing the balls of his hands into his eyes. His bedroom smelled of feverish sweat. Was there something else in the air? Was there something musky? No, definitely not. He looked over at his desk and saw the mask. It still looked like it was staring at him. His mind had been a mess since he found the cursed thing, and had only become worse since returning to the States. Now nothing seemed normal. Everything had acquired a sinister tinge to it. The corners of his apartment seemed darker and deeper. Every time he opened a door, he was positive it would open to some room he'd never seen or an entirely different place or time. Charlie peeled the now cold, damp sheets from his body and crawled out of bed. His throat was parched all of a sudden. He must have sweated out half his bodily fluids during the dream. The wind picked up outside and brushed the low branches against the windows in the narrow hallway. The dead, leafless branches gave off the eerie, dry rasp of ancient bone. As he made his way into the hallway, he swore again that he smelled a musty, wet smell, like dead or dying vegetation. About halfway down the hallway, he realized how hot he was. Was it a fever, or was the apartment just hot? The thermostat read 67 degrees. He must be coming down with some flu bug. The faucet poured a cold stream into his stout rock glass, and he downed it quickly. Instead of clean, ice-cold water, it tasted warm and filthy. He could actually feel dirt in his mouth grinding between his teeth and into his gums. He vomited into the sink and looked at his glass. The glass contained an inch of thick, dirty water, like water from a stagnant pool. Like the pool in the tomb of Mokembu. The thought made him retch again. This time he seemed to vomit up a gallon of dank, foul water filled with sediment. His sink was littered with the grainy residue of soaked earth and pungent water. His eyes watered from pain and fear, and then he heard the noises outside the walls. It sounded like dogs, lots of dogs running below the window, sniffing, growling, and scratching at the exterior, looking for a way in. He staggered back away from the porcelain countertop. The heat was now almost unbearable, and he was now positive the reek of rotting plants was overpowering. The damnable thermostat still read a comfortable 67, mocking him. Charlie was sweating heavily now, the light cotton of his pajama pants clinging to his legs like wet cheesecloth. The dogs continued their search for a breach into the house, and one let out a distinctly non-canine howl. Charlie had heard this call before. Those were not dogs. They were jackals. Now rhythmic drums began a low murmur from somewhere near the back of the house. The drums were pounding almost exactly in time with his heartbeat and speeding up. He could now almost smell the witch doctor from his nocturnal haunts in his apartment, stinking of blood and misery. The jackals started yipping outside, banging and clawing on the door. He heard the nails of their wretched paws clicking and clacking off the window panes. Charlie's head spun, and he sank to a half-crouch. He stumbled into his bedroom, barely noticing those rumbling tribal drums getting louder as he made his way in. Fear had taken over now, and he hardly seemed affected by the sodden dirt clotting in his mouth and covering the front of his clothing. He madly whirled around at the sound of breaking glass. He tripped over the phone cord and fell to the floor in a sodden heap. The receiver fell a foot from his head, and instead of a dial tone, he only heard the maddening drums, louder and faster, emanating from the earpiece. He pushed himself up agonizingly slowly, leaving a stain of sweat and dirt on the carpet. He lurched across the room and grasped the mask that surely brought this absurd, false reality into his mind. The claws of the mongrel assassins clacked against the tile of the kitchen, and the house filled with the scent of a fire that had burned down to the last glowing embers and hot blood. Charlie's head swam with the fever of panic, and he fell to the ground clutching the mask. His vision blacked out. He heard the small, cautious steps of the jackals and the low murmur of voices, all chanting in darkened tones. He could only make out a single word over and over into oblivion. Mokembu, Mokembu, Mokembu. Diana, will you marry me? Howard opened the small black box. Inside was a ring encompassing a small emerald gem. If you looked close enough at it, You could see a small crack down the middle. At first, Diana looked as if she was going to be sick, though that may have been a side effect of the excessive champagne. Howard, she stuttered. Her eyes widened and began to well up. Howard determined whether they were tears of joy or tears of... Yes, she whispered. Yes, a little louder. Yes, she screamed. Of course I'll marry you. They embraced each other, Diana seizing her husband to be so hard that the ring slipped from its box. It hit the restaurant floor and rolled across the room, and then it was picked up. Howard, realizing the ring had escaped from its box, arose from his chair. He saw the old woman and approached her, though he thought twice about doing so. The old woman's face was hidden beneath a black shawl. The hand that was holding the ring was withered and gray. She stood up, her face still a shadowy mass, and spoke 5 words, her voice weak and trembling. You must change the ring. She held out her shaking hand. Howard took the ring. He looked down at it. Excuse me. He looked up, but the old woman had gone. She had only one thing to say. Howard soon forgot about her. The ring was fine. Diana loved it. He was sure. The next morning, Howard's alarm sounded at 6:30. He awoke smiling. Last night had been the happiest of his life. He turned to Diana. Only her hand was visible from under the quilt. Immediately, he thought something tragic had happened. He swept up her hand and let out a sigh of relief. A pulse. He was just being paranoid. Howard kissed his fiancée's hand and left the bed. Howard worked for a modeling agency. He himself wasn't a model, of course, and he only took the photographs, and he was very good at his job. He had a knack for capturing young people on screen. Howard looked in the mirror. He felt like a changed man. He would be married soon. He was committed. It seemed like the right way to live your life. Meet someone and give your life to them. Metaphorically, of course. He quickly ate breakfast and headed out to the car. Later, he would regret not saying a proper goodbye to his wife-to-be. Diana yawned. She too felt different, but for the better or for the worse. It took her a long time to awaken, and even after that, her eyesight was unclear. She arose with great struggle, her back aching. She tried to shake it off, but only gave herself a headache. She had some painkillers in the bathroom somewhere. Once in the bathroom, she rushed straight to the medicine cupboard, not even looking in the mirror, the way she always did in the morning. Where were they? Her headache seemed to get worse by the minute, and so did her eyesight. After she had emptied the entire cupboard, she found what she was looking for. Diana took 2 tablets and swallowed them. She arose from the sink, her back cracking unpleasantly, and washed her face. That seemed to clear up her eyesight a little. Standing fully up, she met her reflection in the rectangular mirror. Diana screamed in terror. One of the most important things in life is to enjoy your work, and Howard did, very much so. He entered his car with a smile on his face. His life was perfect. He could wake up looking forward to his day every day for the rest of his life. He had finally met the perfect woman, and he would love her no matter what. Well, that's what he thought. He rustled around in his pocket for the house key. Once he found it, he slid into the keyhole and turned. There was a click, and the door opened. "Honey, I'm home." There was no reply. "Honey." He skimmed the living room, the kitchen, and the downstairs toilet. The ground floor was deserted. He ascended the stairs at light speed. What if something had happened? He wouldn't be able to bear it. His life had just taken a turn for the better, and it wasn't going to be ruined now. He burst through the bedroom door. There was Diana, under the covers. "Oh, you gave me such a fright." He approached her. "Honey." The quilt quivered. "Come on now. That's enough joking around." Any moment now, she was going to jump out, screaming boo, and he would sweep her up and kiss her. Any moment now. "You're scaring me now, Diana." He pulled the covers away from her, immediately regretting it. There sat an old woman, sobbing into her withered hands. On the ring finger of her left hand was a ring with a cracked emerald gem. Diana. "Don't look at me," she said, her voice identical to that of a woman from the restaurant. Howard would have been sick, but he was paralyzed from head to toe. For a minute, a young man stood staring at the woman he used to know, and then slowly he backed away from her, spoke 2 words, "I'm sorry," and left the woman he loved alone and dying. She had 1 chance left. The hooded woman entered the restaurant. Immediately, she saw them talking intently to each other. She found a seat behind them and waited. He proposed, and then the ring slipped from the box. It rolled towards her. She picked it up. He approached, and then she spoke. "You must change the ring." He looked down at the cracked emerald, and she faded into nothingness. I think it was my somewhat strict upbringing that fostered my intrigue for horror. Following the path of God and basking in the sun's rays is all well and good, but the forbidden aura of all things creepy called to me even at a young age. Imagine the delight of my first library card. Here was a building of profound possibilities. Here among the yellowed pages, I could decipher hushed secrets. Here, I could conjure nearly any fancy. It was only a matter of weeks before the horror section became my new stomping ground. I spent many nights in Batteries reading late at night in the darkness of my room. I often shared the bed in my nightmares with Stephen King and R.L. Stine. Over time, the pangs of terror began to subside. I had developed a thick shell of desensitized awareness. My vivid imagination gushed gore and violence, but the deluge had become commonplace. I resorted to seeking the aid of a withered librarian. I had associated many librarians, but none of them could point me in the right direction. This husk of a woman was the only person whose eyes sparkled through thick lenses when my desires were made manifest. She, too, was a fan of the occult and supernatural. Her station was on the 1st floor, near the exit. Her age demanded sparse mobility, but her mental prowess was truly something to be admired. On weekends, I would approach her desk, and she would wordlessly hand me a note with the call sign of a book. I appreciated the way she so fervently handled this exchange. I approached her desk one day to find an occupant of significantly younger appearance. Puzzled, I cast my eyes around to see if my arthritic mentor had been relocated. The woman, upon seeing my perplexed features, rose from her desk and approached me, sporting a dress too bright for my taste. I looked up at her imploringly. She was holding something against her chest. "You must be Ms. Shipley's friend." I nodded. "I'm sorry, but she will no longer be here. She left me a note and this. It's for you." She held out a book-sized package to me. Could I turn down the box and get her back? I felt cheated and angry, but I took the plainly wrapped gift and stuffed it in my backpack. She eyed me with a mixture of concern and pity. I could read between the lines of our little exchange that Miss Shipley had died. This woman standing in front of me with a shrill voice was unaware of the tumultuous familiarity I had with death. I quietly thanked her and walked away before she could spout another word. In a way, I despised this woman for casually thinking she could fill the position. I was once again upstairs, looking down the aisle so familiar to me. With my ally among the dust, I was no longer going to be able to sustain my bookworm appetite. I dropped my backpack to the floor and sat atop a lonely bucket ladder. I withdrew the package and methodically undid the twine. I would imagine such rope would have been used to hold witches in place while they burned to death hundreds of years ago. I was holding the spine of a book. This much I knew before the paper was completely removed. I expected to see a familiar title, or at least an author I recognize. A somber leather cover with no title greeted me instead. These first few pages were blank. No copyright, no fine print, just the dedication, in familiar scrawls of sputtering ink. I dedicate the last remaining copy of this book to Mike. Some things to note. Do not look under your bed while you read this. Do not go into the library basement. Even in an empty room, you are not alone. Regards, Ms. Shipley, a small surge of adrenaline hits me. Reading about such things is entirely different from first-hand experience. I debated for a few moments before turning the page. The paper was thick and partially yellowed, and the text looks like it was hammered in by a typewriter. The first line of text is simply an address. 585 Blackstone Boulevard, Providence, where I. From behind, a book crashes from the highest shelf onto the floor. I stiffen and inhale deeply. The next line forgotten. Looking around, I see a book splayed open on the mud-colored floor. I stand, my gift held tightly in one hand, and walk over to peer down at the book. If the A/T was on, or if a window was open, I could justify why several pages turned by themselves just then. My instincts kick in. Remember, I am still 12 years old, and I walk backwards towards my seat, retrieve my backpack, and quickly leave the library. Now, most ghost stories end when the main character dies or has been inexplicably driven insane. I am aware of their plight and have resolved not to let such a fate befall me. I am not the blonde who checks the closet. I am not the man who walks down dark alleyways by himself. I have since looked up the address and noted that it is not far from where I used to live on Wingate Road. As of writing this entry, the book has remained unopened in a trunk filled with prized possessions acquired throughout the years. Occasionally, I am struck by how incredulous this story sounds. It is only a few steps and a key later that I can reaffirm my fears that this book does, in fact, exist. Someday I may be brave enough to open it again. Someday. In autumn 2003, my first year studying at Cambridge University, a rumor began circulating about a VHS tape that was causing students to go insane. Nobody knew who had first found the tape or where they had found it, but the story started in October when a history student allegedly stopped talking altogether after watching it. Her roommate claims that she came into the dorm room one evening to find her sitting on her bed, pointing at the VHS player, her eyes wide, and her lips stretched into an unnatural smile. When the girl didn't respond to her even after half an hour, the roommate was sufficiently unnerved to call the police. The history student had apparently suffered intense mental trauma and had lost her ability to speak. Following this incident, the tape was passed around among students. I never actually knew the history student or the roommate who found the tape. Actually, I never heard of the incident reported in any official newspapers, but I have a feeling the tape was real. I heard the stories, and I knew other people who had watched it. Some of it, at least. Those who watched it always gave the same description of what was on it. The tape contained a video that was about an hour long. The footage would begin inside a dimly lit room, perhaps a cellar. It showed a man sitting on a wooden chair in the center of the room, facing away from the camera so that you could only see his back and the back of his head, which was covered by a hood. He appeared to be wearing dark robes, like a priest, and looked thin and frail. A mirror was placed against the wall he was facing and angled so that his face could be seen in the video. It was an old man's face, perhaps around 70 years old, and it wore a coldly serious expression. Quite a few people turned it off at this point. They claimed it already made them feel uneasy. The recording was monochromatic, grainy, and appeared to be old, judging by the style of the mirror and chair, the dark stone walls of the room, and the fact that the lighting was flickering, as if the room were lit by candles. Some people said it looked like it was from the 50s. Some said it looked older. And others said it was more recent, but was recorded so that it looked old. Anyway, shortly after the beginning of the video, the old man began to speak. The strange thing was that nobody was sure what language he was speaking. The audio was distorted, but occasionally you could hear clearly. Some people thought he was speaking a dialect of English or an archaic form of English because they could make out some words. They also described him as having a croaky voice and an unusual accent. A lot of people who watched that far into it got the impression that he was giving a sermon or a lecture. One student I spoke to said that he felt convinced by the man's words, even though he had no idea what he was talking about. It was as if it had some kind of hypnotic effect on him. More disturbingly, most who watched it reported hearing laughter in the background. Some described hearing noises like a baby crying. The noises ranged from being faint to sounding as though they were in the same room. At the 13th minute of the video, the man would stop talking, as if he had finished saying what he had to say, and for the first time, his expression would change. He would smile, a broad-lipped, wide-eyed, emotionless smile. Very few people continued to watch beyond this. This moment in the video was reported to be extremely disturbing for some unknown reason. Many of the viewers feared that they would be scared for life by the image of the old man smiling into the mirror. After a few seconds, the man, still smiling, begins to slowly turn his head to face the camera. That's as much as I know of what follows. Nobody who carried on watching ever went into further detail. When I asked one student why she wouldn't tell me what came after, she went so pale that it was frightening just to look at her. What I do know is that one student who did watch further, previously a grounded atheist, stopped attending his lectures. They found him a week later, curled up, hiding in a church, shivering with fever, and crying that he didn't want to go to hell. The old man in the footage was never identified, nor was the language he was speaking recognized by any of the professors of languages and linguistics at the university. But it was definitely not any form of English. The room with the mirror could have been anywhere in the world. It's still a mystery what happened to the tape at the end. Just as it appeared out of nowhere, it disappeared. After a few months, the hype died down. I haven't spoken to anyone about it since I finished university. Perhaps it's still there right now, hidden somewhere in the archives of a college library or under a bed in an empty dorm room. Perhaps it's in a landfill somewhere far away. Perhaps someone destroyed it a long time ago. I hope someone destroys it. I think there was something on that tape that doesn't belong in this world. Something frightening. Something evil. George never got sick. Well, almost never. He was well into his 30s and had been working an office job for almost 7 years now. It was a standard 8-to-5 job, and he found comfort in the monotony of it. This particular Tuesday, however, George woke up with stomach pains and a massive headache. He got out of bed, and as soon as he stood up, a wave of nausea washed over him, and he rushed to the bathroom, violently vomiting. There was no doubt about it. The man who almost never got sick was definitely going to have to call into work and let them know he wasn't going to make it. He did just that and flopped back onto his bed. George was a lonely man, and he had the apartment all to himself, not that he was using anything but the bed at the moment. He closed his eyes and slept for what seemed like days, but had actually only been for several hours. He woke up feeling refreshed, and thankfully, his nausea and headache were gone. There was a feeling of dread, depression, and hopelessness, and he shook his head, thinking it was just his sick state, but the feelings didn't disappear. He slowly got out of bed. No nausea attacked him this time. The despair increased as he got closer to the bathroom to relieve the pressure on his bladder. He couldn't shake off the feeling that something terrible was wrong. Something was out of place. He quickly finished his business and turned to head back to his bed, hoping that he just needed some more rest. That's when he saw her. An old woman with tattered clothes, gray wisps of hair in patches, a cloak of some dead animal draped around her shoulders, and long, slender fingers walked ever so slowly up the sidewalk of the cul-de-sac his small house was in. He shivered involuntarily. The woman was very out of place in the upscale neighborhood, and there was something unnerving about her. He watched as the woman passed by his house and stopped in front of the house right next to his. She walked over to his neighbor's mailbox and reached inside her cloak. A red envelope was produced, and she placed it inside the mailbox. Suddenly, she turned her head and looked right at him. George jerked back and leaned against the wall, out of sight. He counted to 5, and then leaned to take a peek out of the window. The woman was gone. At this moment, George was thinking that he was more sick than he had previously thought. He quickly rushed back to bed and fell asleep, not even realizing that the feeling of dread was gone. The next day, George was feeling much better and had completely forgotten about the old woman from yesterday. He went to work like he always did, and when the day was done, he headed home. As he pulled into the cul-de-sac, he could see that something was going on. There were quite a few police cars surrounding the house next to his, and he slowly pulled into his driveway, wondering what was going on. He was met by a police officer at his front door. "Sir, I need to ask you a few questions about the Chavis family." "Oh, yes, of course." George furrowed his brow. Something had happened. He wondered if they were okay. "Sir, can you tell me how many family members the Chavis family has?" "Mother, father, and 2 boys, so that makes 4 total." "Thank you. And what were you doing at around 12:00 p.m. today?" "I was at work." "Advertisements. Do you have any way to validate that?" George gave the officer his boss's number, and after a few minutes of talking on the phone, he thanked George for his time and turned to go. "Wait, what happened? Are they okay?" "Sir, the Chavis family was murdered today." George's mouth gaped open in shock. Murdered? That was crazy. His neighborhood had always been a pleasant, uttofty way one where nothing happened. As he was lying in bed, about to go to sleep, he suddenly remembered the old woman and the red envelope. He shook his head. There was no way there was any kind of connection to the murder. He didn't sleep well that night. The next day, he went to work like normal and tried to forget about the odd woman and the murder of his next-door neighbors. He got home, and as per his usual habit, he went right away to his mailbox to get his mail. He lowered the cover and almost fell down in surprise. There was only one thing in his mailbox, and it was a small red envelope. It had no return address and no stamp. It was just addressed to him in scratchy red ink. He grabbed it and rushed into the house. He was going to burn the envelope. He opened the cupboard where he kept his matches, but they weren't there. He cursed at himself and rummaged through his drawers and cupboards, desperately trying to find matches or a lighter hiding somewhere. He felt it again. That feeling of absolute despair, it weighed down on him, and he clutched the counter for support. Footsteps sounded on the floor behind him. He hadn't heard the door open. He turned around quickly and saw the same old woman from before standing before him. As soon as his eyes fell on her, the feeling of despair increased tenfold, and he slowly slid to the floor. He couldn't even stand. It was like the energy was being sucked out of him. He watched as the woman stepped closer and closer to him, her footsteps unnaturally loud. The last thing he remembered was a grin on the woman's face. The red envelope was still clutched tightly in his hand. It has been exactly a year now since the incident happened. The day that my younger brother, John, was killed. I have tried and tried to forget about what happened, but it is still burned into my mind. So I know this is rather cliché, but I am recording this and putting it online in hopes that sharing what happened for all to hear will bring me solace. My brother and I had a very strong bond, beyond what most siblings have, because of our isolation from civilization in southern Louisiana. We were raised by our mother, who not only assumed the additional position of a father, but also served as our teacher. Due to the distance from the nearest school, we were forced to be homeschooled. Our father disappeared when we were very young. He left one day and never returned. Our mom says he left her for a younger woman, but I am pretty sure now that that isn't true. Last year, on my brother's 17th birthday, we decided to take the canoe out through the swamp in hopes of finding an alligator that we could shoot. John and I have always loved hunting alligators. It is so fulfilling to bag a big gator and get to feed the family. Well, I have wandered off topic, so we were out on the canoe, rowing around. The cold, salty sea air met the hot, humid swamp air, creating a very interesting atmosphere. We had already, in past adventures, scouted a 3-mile radius around the house, but we were determined to reach farther than ever. Rowing in a canoe isn't the fastest means of transportation, but it works. We had gotten very good at swerving around the protruding stumps, trees, and the occasional rock that poked out of the murky, green water. The sudden rush of water knocked us out of our trance. It was an alligator. The time we had been waiting for was right there. My brother rowed closer as I grabbed my .45 revolver. The alligator wasn't affected by us. It continued to swim north. The sun was setting as my brother gazed out towards the sea. His voice trailed off. I looked to see what he was looking at, and almost couldn't believe what I saw. Standing on a small island were two people who appeared to be blankly staring at us, mouths agape, and in between them was a glowing object that neither of us could make out what it was. "Hey!" I yelled at the two men. Strangely, there was no response. They didn't even move, blink, shift, or anything. "Let's get out of here," I said it to John, but he didn't reply. The canoe was drifting, and the only change among the people on the island was their heads gradually turning to keep their blank stares on us. "Hey, let's go," I spoke up. He stared blankly back at the small island. "John," I yelled, but again, no response. I was about to start paddling, but John unexpectedly leaped out of the canoe and into the murky water. "What are you doing?" I asked him as he swam, then walked to the island. Before he was out of the water, however, I noticed something. It appeared to be black hair emerging from the sea, which was followed by the top of a head. Then what I was expecting to be a person, but that's where I went wrong. Walking out of the ocean was something I had never seen before. It was tall, probably 7 or 8 feet, had long black hair, and its black eyes looked foggy due to what was most likely a film over them. They slanted down its face at an angle. Its face was narrow and sharp, like it had been starved. This absolutely terrified me. What are you supposed to do when you see something like that? Anyways, the creature walked up the island, and the two people shot one last look at me. This one was different, though. I saw tears and absolute fear suppressed by their blank stares. It was like their human instincts were trying to prevail over whatever trance they were in, but that was to no avail. The creature grabbed both men, one in each arm, and turned around, returning to the ocean. I saw bubbles emerge for a little bit when their heads became submerged. Now, I am sure you don't believe me, but I saw what I saw. If someone had told me this story, I wouldn't have believed them either. I yelled to John, "We need to get out of here now." And his response is still unforgettable. His head slowly turned around as he gave me a blank stare, then turned back and approached the glowing object, which flashed a red color, then returned to its white shine. "John," I cried, but he just stared at me. I fled, I went home, and I told my mom all about it, but she didn't believe me. She kept telling me to tell her the truth about what happened, but it was and still is the truth. You have to believe me. After insisting it was the truth, she finally gave in and left to go find the elusive glowing item on the island. She never returned. I have been living by myself for the past year. I just wanted to get the story out. I am starting to worry. However, I think the light is getting closer because at night, if I look just at the right angle, through the trees, I can see what appears to be a faint light. I am tired of living in fear. I am going to submit this now. Go check out the light. Then I'll update this when I know the truth. I'm a normal high school student. My friends and I make silly YouTube videos. We do our schoolwork, most of it, at least, and we like hanging out with each other. However, something strange has come up, and none of us really know what to think about it. It all started when my friend Selena decided to buy herself a book of the horror genre, looking to get into the Halloween season, seeing as it was October at the time. It wasn't a very big book, just about the thickness of those magic treehouse books I read as a child. It was blue on all sides, with no art or even a title. Selena got it anyway, though, because despite its size, the librarian said she had read it herself and strongly recommended it. Judging from how quickly she read the book and how much it held her attention while she was reading it, I guess we could see why. When she finished, she couldn't stop going on about how mind-blowing the ending of the story was. Me and our other two friends, Kyle and Mark, asked about it, but she insisted we read it for ourselves. I'm not really a big reader. Don't get me wrong, I can read fine. In fact, in elementary school, I read faster than most of the kids in my grade. Then they started making us read as part of our grade, and I just lost interest. It wasn't fun anymore since I was being forced into it. However, I do enjoy horror. I don't know why, but I really enjoy things like creepypasta, actual horror books, horror games, and even movies. The movies tended to be my least favorite, though, seeing as a lot of the plots were reused between films, not to mention how slowly the story moved. No one else volunteered, since Kyle was disinterested in a lot of the things we talked about, and Mark was the kind of person who was easily scared and spent a lot of his time being anxious over silly things. I volunteered to read it, and she handed me the book. I read it that night, and it was honestly very interesting. It followed a teenage boy whose mother had been murdered, and he decided to investigate it only to find out it had been a man who had been pretending to be his father for almost a year. It was unexpected and a great plot twist, and the entire story was suspenseful and well written. I was excited to talk to Selena about it the next morning, but we decided to wait until we could get the other two to read it. The next couple of days, I kept thinking and theorizing about the plot and what was left unanswered, waiting for them to finish reading it. Finally, on Friday, the day came when they finished, and we could talk about it without spoiling it for each other. This is where things got strange. We kept trying to talk about it, but any time we tried making any kind of reference or talking about a character, nothing we said lined up, and we were left confused. Why do you think the killer was after his mom? I asked Selena. Whose mom? The kids weren't at camp with their parents. Their parents were at home. Selena answered. What camp? And what killer? Mark asked, seeming even more confused than the two of us. The killer that made the mannequins. I don't know what they mean by camp and their parents, though. Kyle said. There weren't any mannequins in the story. Selena and I both argued. Yes, there was. Look. Kyle went to open the book and flipped to a certain page, but stopped when we noticed something strange. The pages all just had the word story written on them. We looked at each other, then back at the book. We couldn't quite come up with anything to say. What does a person say when a full book they read a day or two ago turns out to have been pretty much blank the whole time? Selena went to return the book, only to find out that the librarian wasn't there, and that none of the other librarians had heard from her since Selena had gotten the book from them. We've tried getting past it, though, forgetting that it ever happened. Besides some anxiety here and there, it started leaving my mind entirely. Started to. Something's bothering me, though. Something that I noticed last night, as I was lying in bed. Selena had plans to go to summer camp this year. Kyle has a real-life phobia of mannequins, and Mark hasn't been the same since he read whatever it was he read. He always seems to be thinking more deeply about everything. I tried asking him about whatever it was that could have been troubling him, but he just sighed and softly said, I can't say, or it will happen. I knew I had to warn them about this. I wasn't about to risk the possibility of a coincidence, and we've taken steps to protect ourselves. Selena canceled her plans for camp. We're thinking about trying to get help for Kyle's phobia, and for Mark, who just seems like he needs help in general. And me. I've decided to start watching my father very closely.